Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He joins us now. We're talking about his latest book, UFOs at the Drive-In, 100 True Cases of Close Encounters at Drive-In Theatres. A fascinating topic. Hi, Preston, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Really good. Look, I must admit, probably like most other people in this field, that I never gave drive-ins even a second thought about whether they could be a UFO hotspot.
You know, neither did I. I actually did run into my own case very early on in my research, 1990s or so. A lady had come to work at my office, Claudia. I remember vividly, she found out I was a UFO researcher and told me this incredible encounter at the Paramount Drive-In Theater. And I just thought it was a one-off. I had no idea that this was a thing. I have to tell you, I was shocked when I found out how many cases there were.
Yeah. Is that what prompted you to do some investigation into it?
No, I just kind of let that, I investigated the case as best as I could and let it go. And was working on other cases and writing books, and would occasionally run across a case like this, but was when I was writing UFOs over Colorado, I ran into 3 cases in a row. And I thought, oh, you know what? I remember that first case I had. I'm like, this is something going on here. And I started to really look into it, and I found out, yeah, I just did a brief survey of the literature, couldn't find really much of anything in books and magazines. But as I dug deeper into, New Fork and MUFON, and other reporting centers, APRO and NICAP, their files, started to find a lot, and mostly from newspaper articles and things like this. And yeah, found over 100 cases. And these are not normal sightings, I can tell you that. There's a portion, I would say maybe 20, 30%, which are just, you're in the right place at the right time. It's a drive-in theater, it's at night, you're outside for quite some time. Your chances of seeing a UFO are much better than, I would say, being inside. And yeah, some cases reflect that. They just have what I would call a random flyby.
Right.
Something just flies overhead. But that's not what these cases are really about. Most are completely different from anything in all the literature on UFOs. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, I was reading through the cases in the book, and just the nature, I mean, they're pretty spectacular, and I can only wonder why they're not front page news.
Yeah, sometimes they are, but there's several cases where witnesses have called the news, and the news wasn't interested, and neither was the airport or the police, and they kind of gave up until they found a UFO reporting center. So I think there's multiple factors, because there's some evidence of cover-up as well in a few cases. So the ridicule factor is another. Yeah, they often reach local newspapers, but in case after case, witnesses check the newspapers afterwards, and there's nothing. And the problem is they're not reporting it, and if they're not, probably the next person isn't, and so it kind of goes down the line like that.
Yeah. You'd think that the ridicule factor probably wouldn't come into play, because I mean, we're at a drive-in and there's a bunch of people that are seeing it.
Right, and that's what makes these cases unique and really profound, because not only are they widely viewed, we're talking generally 100 people, maybe 50, in some cases 100, 200, upwards of 3,000 in one outlying case.
Wow.
And these are very low-level sightings. These are not a light flying by at night. These objects come right over the screen, right next to the screen, right over the theater, and beyond that, these objects stay a long time.
Yeah.
So, well, not always, but a good portion of them are long-lasting sightings. So these 3 factors, there's nothing like it. You cannot find any other cases in the UFO literature in which there's more than 100 adults witnessing a UFO at very low level for a long period of time, over and over and over again. I looked up like concerts
Yeah.
or baseball games, or there's a few. I will admit there are a few, a small handful cases of UFOs over, public events, but not like this. I mean, this is
No.
crazy.
Yeah. So in your research, I mean, could you put your finger on why drive-ins would be targeted by UFOs?
I developed some theories early on and kind of considered all the ones that I could think of. I mean, one theory is that perhaps they're just curious. These are drive-in theaters seen from above are very striking. They have a huge kind of footprint that's visible, I would say, from deep space.
Mm-hmm.
And there's these giant screens and these beams of light, and that's what UFOs are all about. Someone's taken on board UFO. There's always, a colored screen, often, I should say.
Yep.
So I thought, maybe they're just curious. Like, what are these humans doing, all lined up like this? Maybe they're studying us, watching our reactions, perhaps, or using the movies to learn about us,
Mm-hmm.
which I hope not, because some of our movies are pretty violent. So those are a couple theories that ultimately, I don't think they're there to abduct people, because that's not what we're seeing. And yeah, it was very curious. I finally decided, just based on the type of behavior that we're seeing here, it's very brazen. It's very much in your face. What I would call a display, a publicity stunt.
Yep.
I believe that they are showing themselves off intentionally. I mean, that conclusion is inescapable.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I'm guessing at this point that it's to basically announce their presence.
Okay.
I don't think they're there to watch the movie. There's only one or two cases where it seems like that's what's going on here.
They hung around.
Right. But yeah, they seem to, I think that's what it is. And I'm guessing it's because eventually they want to have open official disclosure, or open official contact, rather.
Okay. I just thought I lost you there for a minute. Okay. I was going to ask you, there was one report of missing time. So would that indicate an abduction?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. That's the Ascot Park Drive-In Theater case, August 1974. And that was in Ohio. I corresponded with the witness directly, so it's a great case.
Yep.
And this is kind of the ultimate case of, drive-in theater encounters, because in this case, it's a pretty full theater, and this huge black triangular shaped object comes right overhead. He says it's much larger than the theater itself, covers the entire parking lot, and as it appears overhead, it's very low, and all the theater lights go out. The screen goes out. People's cars go out. The snack stand goes out. It's pitch black. And this object is just making a low hum, and it's moving right over the theater. Everyone's getting out of their cars and kind of staring aghast, dumbfounded. And wasn't really any signs of panic, he said. But it was definitely weird. His ears popped, some weird, strange effects. And this thing just moves overhead. And suddenly, the lights come back on. The theater's like a switch is flipped.
Yep.
And everyone just starts watching the movie again, including himself, by the way. He did not remember this incident until some time later.
Wow.
And there are other cases like this with weird memory slips or amnesia factors, which is certainly we see in lots of UFO cases, particularly close up. And these are close up. So yeah, it wasn't until like 3 years later, I think, he was in a bookstore. The witness, his name is Scott. He saw Ed Ruppelt's book, Unidentified Flying Objects, the Blue Book guy, Project Blue Book.
Yep.
And suddenly just had this flash. This is what I call a cue. We see this in a lot of abduction cases where someone will see a short person, or a bald head, or large dark eyes, or something that reminds them of an original event. and boom, they remember. We see this in all kinds of trauma victims, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it all just flooded back into his head. And he's, to this day, wonders, could there have been a mass abduction or something? It's hard to say. Uh, it's
Well,
kind of unique in that way, this case, in
because
terms of
it's classic UFO. When, especially, you know, when someone says I saw it close up, and then they say, and then I found myself, you know, an hour away from where I was, and every time someone says they saw a UFO close up, my first question is always, did you have missing time?
yeah, and I don't think it's always clear. I remember when I first began investigating, I wasn't aware how easily that could slip in. And so
Yeah.
there are other things you look for as well, in a very strong emotional reaction, um, anyone feeling physically unusual in any way, electromagnetic effects. These are all, you know, how close is the sighting? If it's within a couple 100 feet, that's a red flag for
Yeah.
sure in terms of
Yeah.
missing time
Yeah.
probabilities.
Yeah. Are people seeing the same type of UFO, or are we seeing different shapes of UFOs?
It's mostly the same shape, really. It's mostly your classic silver domed disc, usually with colored lights, which is pretty interesting to me. There are, yeah, Scott, in the case I just referenced, Ascot Park, Scott saw a kind of a triangular, more boomerang shape.
Mm-hmm.
And some people do see kind of glowing objects, so it's hard to tell because it's just a very bright light. But generally speaking, it's your classic disc. Sometimes with portholes, though, that's much more rare.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned Project Blue Book before. One of these or some of these cases have been investigated, were investigated during Project Blue Book?
Oh yeah, our government definitely knows all about this. And in fact, the very first case I found was July 22nd, 1950, which is interesting. There's none before that. And drive-in theaters were around, you know, a good
Yeah.
10, 15 years before that. So that's kind of curious and lines up exactly with another study I did of schoolyard UFO cases, which also started in 1950. And that's very close to what's happening here. These are schoolyard cases, UFOs coming down and showing themselves to groups of children. But yeah, the first case I found was the Starlight Drive-In. This is in Spartanburg, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
The witness was Vernon Gwynn. He was a journalist, so I think that's why he was able to get some attention paid to his case. And he and his wife and other people at the theater saw this very large kind of dirigible shaped object coming up pretty low, you know, like 1,000 feet over the theater for once, then a second time, and then a third time. You know, by the fourth time it came over, these guys realize, you know, this is very unusual, and they're out of the cars looking at this thing, and he ends up reporting it. His report was routed to Project Blue Book, which was really very new, and actually forwarded, get this, to Colonel John Meads, who's the commanding general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Right.
So
Wow.
what does that tell you? I mean, that Wright-Patterson, we know that's where UFO Central.
Yep.
And so yeah, clearly they thought this was important enough to go right to the top